Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us for Amazon EKS Distro, an open source distribution of Kubernetes. I'm Raja Jadeja, I'm a senior product manager on the containers team. Now over the next 30 minutes, we're going to take you through a couple key things. We're looking forward to telling you a little bit more about Amazon EKS, our approach for providing Kubernetes, actually how we go through the Kubernetes release process and all the different things we add along the way. Amazon EKS Distro itself, which is kind of how we pull all of that together. And then we'll tell you a little bit more about how partners are providing access for it and how you can get started with Amazon EKS Distro too. So let's get started. Before we actually get too deep into Amazon EKS Distro, let's talk a little bit about Kubernetes on AWS. Now, we think the best way to provide Kubernetes experience for you is a managed one, and we do that with Amazon EKS. Now, the way we have approached this is we've actually started with providing a deeply integrated experience with AWS, with IAM, EC2 networking, EC2 itself, a number of deployment options, and then we've also provided flexibility in enabling you to use open source tools along the way. So DevOps tools, your management tools and frameworks that you set up and configure for observation, logging, etc. All of those are possible. We use the same Upstream Kubernetes version, so you get that same portability of tools that you might be familiar with already in other environments, whether it's on-prem or across other EKS clusters too. And then we also have added in security and compliance, and that's one area that we're going to focus on quite a bit today. So let's talk a little bit more about that. With Amazon EKS, the first thing that was important for us as we looked at providing this as an experience was making sure that it was upstream conformant. So we make sure that we use the same versions of Kubernetes that are upstream. We don't fork them. We provide the same versioning, exactly the same releases. Now, we don't provide every release, but we actually provide the ones that we've tested and made sure fit the right fit. And as an aspect of that, we actually support 4 versions of Kubernetes. So 3 current ones supported by the community, and then we actually provide backporting support for another version of Kubernetes that is no longer supported upstream. And then of course, we actually spend a bunch of time around the testing aspect, making sure that's fully consistent, conformant upstream. But that means at the end of the day, we want to make sure that your clusters are still performant, reliable, and secure. So we add a number of tooling to make sure you reach that experience, whether it's around scalability or just the overall security of itself by integrating into IAM. And then ensuring that the overall architecture, the way we deploy it, we configure and operate it behind the scenes, ensures reliability. And we have an SLA to back that up. But at the end of the day, the whole goal of doing all of that work is to take some of that undifferentiated heavy lifting, add some of our expertise in, and make sure that operating and managing Kubernetes for you is really very simple and boring. We don't want this to be the focus of your work that you do. We want you to be focused on the applications that drive your business instead. And so what that means is that we take care of all the tactical operations. All those bits at the bottom there, whether it's testing different Kubernetes releases, dependencies and compatibility with other versions of it, and then also making sure that your control plane is up and running. We're monitoring that, making sure it's available and stable, and then we provide an SLA and make sure its uptime is set as well. That's why we have certain recommendations and requirements around having a certain number of AZs whenever you do create a cluster. That's to ensure that you have quorum when it comes to etcd, make sure that there's enough sufficient operations if there's a failure, and make sure that at the end of the day, the clusters are just running for you, and you don't need to worry about that. We provide security patching, so we certainly patch all the point releases within the version you selected, and then we also do our part of the CVE process, the embargo process. So the moment that there's a CVE announced, we're actually applying that to your cluster same day, making them available, so you're secure, running, and operating the way that you should be. And then we also take care of etcd backup. So if there is a failure, recovery, failover, all those things are possible. So what that means is we take care of all the undifferentiated heavy lifting. So you can focus on your work, your applications, things that are important for you. And so if you look at the slide, what that really amounts to is at the bottom half of this, right? The tactical operations. Kubernetes testing, making sure all the different dependencies are working with each other, monitoring the control plane to ensure that you have full availability. Now this translates into some of the requirements that we have as well, such as having a minimum of at least 2 AZs, preferred 3. Or make sure that your control planes, if there's a failure, you can keep on running and operating without there being any kind of an interruption. This also means that we can then provide uptime and SLA guarantees as well, so that you know that you can always rely on the cluster being there and available and ready to operate. We also provide security patching support too. So what that means is when a new patch release of Kubernetes comes out, we apply those for you. We test to make sure it's the right ones, and then we test those and apply them. But that also means when it comes to CVEs, we actually go through the process. We're part of the embargo process. So the moment that it's released and announced, we're applying it to your cluster. So you get the advantage of being readily patched and having that applied the moment that you should. And then we also take care of etcd backups as well, so that if there is a failure, we need to recover, we can actually apply those for you and get up and running. And then what you focus on then is the top half of this slide, the strategic operations. And with the strategic operations, you then means you're focusing on your application upgrades, your application deployments, security, make sure the right people have access to the bits that they should, setting it up to work and align with your organization, your roles and responsibilities, the people that are operating inside of your clusters. And then making sure that your users are able to get access in the way that they should, setting up all the connectivity. We take care of the bottom half for you, so you don't need to. Now, we've mentioned this a few times. I'm going to mention it once more. We are focused primarily on security. That is P0. We drop everything for security, make sure that the patches that have been applied, if there's any issues that occur, and it's the focus of every single release that we do is to make sure it aligns from a security perspective and ensuring that you can actually trust and be reliant upon us for that. The next thing is reliability. At the end of the day, the reason why you're coming to AWS, why you're depending upon Amazon, is that you want to have that reliability. You want a managed service that is running and operating, ensure that it's available, and we're doing the work that we need to ensure that you're a part of that process to have reliable clusters that are set up and running the way that they should be. And we provide some of the configuration and opinionation there to be successful there. We're adding some of the tooling to make sure that they stay up and running and operating. And of course, when things go bump in the night, that they stay up and available too. So that's something that we are focused on. And so when we talk about Kubernetes and how we kind of support the community and the things that we're providing, a lot of the work that we provide and what we upstream is focused around this concept of security and reliability. And so what is it that we contribute then? Security patches. That's one of the primary things that we provide back to community. One of the most important focuses that we have in terms of patching the clusters, providing to make sure that you have the security of that the clusters are running the way that they should be. And so that's one of the first things that we actually focus upon. And what does that actually include? What's part of that? Well, patches and client versions is a big piece of this. When we actually do security patching analysis, when we have a new patch that comes out from Kubernetes, a new release, we go through a series of tests. We ensure conformance, we ensure compatibility of Kubernetes, Core DNS, etcd, all those other pieces, as well as the CNI and CSI. And so we provide patches for those. We make sure that the client versions are working the way they should be. We also focus on performance. And so what that means is, for example, etcd Client v3 has a great performance improvement. We saw great success for our customers that are using it. And so we wanted to make sure that you have access to that as well. And so we actually provide all of those bits, the version that we have tested to be compatible with each other, the security patches for security, and as well as some of the changes and suggestions we have for configuration, as well as client versions to be really reliable and performant. Now, some of those aren't yet packaged out of the box with Upstream Kubernetes. So how do we square that with the fact that EKS is supposed to be, we want it to be completely open source compliant, Upstream compliant as well? Well, some bits of it are actually not diverging. They're just eventually going to be convergent. We can get there faster. We can provide the etcd v3 client for you now, for example. Upstream provides v2, and make sure that you can start adopting that. We've also made some decisions along the way to make sure that you're operating with clusters that can really be dependable and reliable. Part of that is the fact, for example, etcd logs every single gRPC connection. Well, as you can imagine, as you get larger clusters, that volume can grow pretty rapidly. You can blow it out entirely as well. And so we put a cap on there to do some log rotation to prevent that from happening and ensure that you have it always running and available etcd. We also provide some patching so that you can define some allow lists when it comes to kubeproxy. The whole point behind it is that it can be used as a way to kind of circumvent some safeguards you might have in place. We provide an allow list so you can ensure that only the IPs and sources for changes and operations are coming from where you want them to, and trust. And so we apply all those bits. As a result, all of those changes mean more reliable cluster, a more performing cluster to reach some of those scalability goals you might have. We've incorporated all of those bits together. Now that helps just about anyone running Kubernetes, especially certainly those that are running Kubernetes in AWS that can rely on other services to achieve some of those goals too. But we've also included some AWS specific patches that are EKS specific in AWS as well. So there's some patches for Fargate to facilitate the support Fargate deployments with Amazon EKS. We've also made some changes to ensure that you don't ever really get locked out from your cluster inadvertently. So there's some patches that we've included along the way. Now, we've spent a lot of time on all of this work. We launched EKS back in June of 2018, and we've done a lot of the work operationally, and you've seen that as we kind of sped up some of our cadence for adoption. Now, where are we taking this to? What is the net result of all of this? How are we going to actually provide something more for you as a result of this that's more tangible? Well, one of the things that as we started thinking about that, is that there's a whole class of customers actually that are not EKS specific that have been asking us for some further support, some learnings about how we've approached things that they can leverage themselves. And so one of the things that we've seen is that some of these customers have requirements that they can't use Amazon EKS. We ideally want them to be able to, and many of them are working in the direction of getting there, but they oftentimes can't, and they have some specific reasons why. They might have some custom tooling they need to use. Their applications might require customization of the control plane flags. They might be migrating to AWS, and so while they might directionally be getting to EKS, they need some help in the process before that so they can actually pull all the bits together and have a similar type of an experience. They don't want to have to wait yet for EKS to get that same reliability and security. Other customers need to be able to deal with scenarios where they're actually deploying across a wide variety of compute requirements, hardware, and environments overall. So what that means is they might be deploying on-premise, they might have very specific requirements in AWS, they want consistency across all of that. And then there's those customers that have been just working with Kubernetes for so long, they've got the muscle memory when it comes to Kubernetes operations and management, that are experts with it, and they just find it's more valuable for them to kind of continue operating the same way they have been and keep using and self-managing Kubernetes clusters themselves. So all of those customers, unfortunately, though, mean that when they've made that decision or they've had those requirements, they have to manage it themselves. They have to self-manage Kubernetes. And so what that means is all that work that I talked about earlier with version tracking and building new versions, making sure they're fully repeated, making sure they're consistent across different application teams, patching them, tracking all those different versions, compatibility testing, ideally checking to make sure that they're conformant, aligning different versions across all this. You're doing that yourself, right? Those customers have to figure those bits out all on their own. And right now, there isn't a great way for us to kind of externalize some of those learnings that we've had with EKS and make that possible for customers to adopt as well. They've got to figure it out themselves. So what do we do? How do we share some of the learnings that we've had? How do we address the use case of customers that have this type of a requirement? Well, we're just going to give it to you. That's the goal. We're going to provide the distribution to you so you can consume it yourselves. And in fact, we're going to take two steps here. So the first bit we talked about earlier today, was launched earlier this week by Andy Jassy, is Amazon EKS Distro. It's actually available now. You can adopt that, pull it from the GitHub repo, and start using that. And it meets, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, all those different capabilities we have, includes all of those learnings inside of this distribution. The other piece of this is Amazon EKS Anywhere. We also announced this. It's a pre-announced, not available yet, but we're going to provide some tools to get you up and running with the EKS Distro in the future. So we're excited about talking about that over the next year. I certainly want to hear from you folks that are interested in that. But for now, let's talk about Amazon EKS Distro and how we're pulling all of this together for you guys. So Amazon EKS Distro, let's dig into that. So what is Amazon EKS Distro? Now, there's a word distro in there. Let's just keep that in the back of our mind for just a few moments. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, what that actually means. Now, first of all, earlier on we were talking about Amazon EKS. One of the most important tenets is that we are upstream. And so Amazon EKS Distro provides the upstream Kubernetes versions adopted by Amazon EKS, and is used also, by the way, to power EKS Anywhere in the future when it becomes available. And it's only those open source components. We're trying to make sure that we're providing the alignment with what we're providing upstream, all those patches and versions as well, all pulled together inside of this. So all those tools that we use along the way for providing those builds, the configurations that we suggest, we talked about a little bit earlier, the security patches that we've included that are upstreamed, all of that's getting included with Amazon EKS Distro so that you don't have to go tracing all these different bits. And that includes some of the configuration choices for some of the dependent tools like with etcd patches, the client version that we suggest you using. All of those bits are actually included with this. And so we also provide then the backporting of fixes. So when you go to adopt EKS Distro, we support 4 versions with Amazon EKS, but we're going to align version support with EKS Distro as well. Amazon EKS supports 4 versions. We backport the patches to that one that's not supported by the community yet. Same things are possible with Amazon EKS Distro. So if you're running a little bit more long-tailed, you'll be able to get patches and security and CVE fixes for those as well. And then we're also providing the ability to make the builds be reproducible. So the number of customers operate in regulated industries, they need to be able to confirm that what they're pulling down matches what we published. Don't want a man-in-the-middle attack or someone that's kind of intercepted them in between and put in some Bitcoin mining or some kind of a Trojan or virus or something else like that. We want to make sure that what you're deploying and using to provision your clusters is the same thing that we provided. So we're providing the environment flags, as well as the open source tooling details so that you can achieve reproducible builds and have the same map hash for the builds that you actually produce. Let's talk a little bit about that word distro. So is Amazon EKS a distro? Is it a fork of Kubernetes? The simple answer is no, not at all. Absolutely not. We're actually providing upstream open source Kubernetes. Now, why are we calling it a distribution? Well, it often does have that connotation, which can be negative, that it's been forking something, we're doing something different, we're not providing it back to the community. It couldn't be further from the truth. We're absolutely upstream 100% conformant. Reason we're calling it a distribution is because it makes it the simplest way to understand exactly what it is that we're providing. And so what we're actually providing then is upstream Kubernetes, SCD and etcd control, core DNS, upstream CNI, and then the CSI sidecars. These are all the core things that you need to get started. Now, notably, it doesn't include like an AWS CNI. It doesn't include the Amazon controller for Kubernetes. We're actually providing just those open source bits that you need to get started and get going, and then expect you to pull in all the other tools that you want to use. In some of those cases I mentioned earlier, customers need to be able to define their own tooling, have their own configuration, their own way of deploying these clusters. This allows you to be opinionated about it, not have to go parse through the package to pull up bits that aren't relevant. These are the core common bits that should be relevant for just about everybody that needs to deploy a Kubernetes distribution, or needs to deploy Kubernetes, and this allows you to pull all of those bits together into one spot. Now, one other thing to note, by the way, is that you can adopt all of this. We talked about this being open source. Well, this can be available, it is available, and can be adopted through our GitHub repo. You can also pull this down from mirrors inside of AWS using S3 as well as ECR, and the newly announced, a few weeks ago actually, if you haven't heard about it, check it out, the ECR public repository as well. So you can actually pull this and deploy this where you need to and have a little bit of flexibility there as well. That's really the goal. Now, some additional details that are probably important to know about the actual release itself. First of all, the container images, they're based in Amazon Linux too. So just for your awareness. The exception to that, of course, is core DNS, which we built from scratch. And then the container images themselves. We support AMD 64, ARM 64, and then AMD 64 multi-platform OCI images. And then the AWS will provide manifests, actually, so that when you go to deploy this, you can use the Kubernetes CRD approach for getting these deployed out there. Let's talk a little bit about partners and how you're actually going to go about deploying this in your environment. Well, obviously, we're providing only the open source common bits. You're going to provide an installer, you're going to provide all the other components to deploy, but you do get that consistency then with Amazon EKS. And so one of the important things that we thought was the right way to approach this and bring it to market is with partners. So there's a number of partners that are going to be adopting Amazon EKS Distro and providing support for them. Weaveworks is the first one. You can go to our website, the product detail page, and see a number of other partners that are provisioning Kubernetes, providing Amazon EKS as one of the distributions you can use to deploy. So you get that installation experience plus the other great tooling that they provide. We're also providing partners that are listed on there that provide just Kubernetes tools for observation, logging, security, etc. So you'll be able to go there, check out all the different tools that actually provide that capability, all on the product detail page. But for now, there's a couple I wanted to talk about just to say a little bit more about what you can experience and what you can expect with Amazon EKS Distro when you start using some of these partner tools. So the first one here we wanted to talk about was Weaveworks. Now, we've been working with Weaveworks for some time. They provide a set of good GitOps tools. In fact, they've coined that phrase. And they also have Weaveworks Kubernetes platform too for provisioning Kubernetes clusters. And they integrate in all their GitOps tools so you get the benefit of the deployment pipelines, the GitOps approach when you go to provision clusters. Now, they've actually provided the ability to provision EKS Distro clusters. So they deploy Kubernetes clusters already. They've adopted a new distribution from our new distribution, and they can actually provision out EKS Distro clusters on-premise on your own hardware, and then have consistency with Amazon EKS in AWS. This is a great way to approach this, and in fact, And talking to Weaveworks a little bit, they were pretty excited about bringing this to their customers. In fact, that consistency was an important story. And that's part of the reason why we provided this distribution, is that customers still wanted that consistency with EKS. We deploy a lot of clusters with Amazon EKS. We want customers to get the same benefits of our learnings over time, and this will allow us to have that type of a dialogue and share that with all of you as well. And so you can deploy this now using WKP, have EKS Distro underneath the covers, the same learnings as EKS, and deploy it to the different environments that you have to. We also talked a little bit with Refay, and Refay is actually providing integration to the Refay platform itself. So Refay Managed Kubernetes. They actually provide a way for a single dashboard. They do proxy authentication, visibility for all of your clusters deployed in all the different environments that they support. And now one of the options when you go to configure is actually Amazon EKS Distro. So you can actually provision out a cluster using Refay, and it actually deploys out there EKS Distro. Take a quick look at what that looks like. When you go through the configuration flow and creation flow for a new cluster, you're going to get a set of options. Now, at the top on the left-hand side, you'll see a quick screenshot that shows all those breakdowns. And the first thing you can do is choose if you want to actually deploy this in public cloud or your data center itself. Then you can define, once you make one of those choices, what it is that you're going to be deploying and some of the details. If you choose public cloud, you get the choice of Amazon EKS. If you're choosing to actually deploy this on your own environment, you can go down to the Linux installers. You can choose some of the options that you want, and then you get a choice of distribution, Refay or Amazon EKS Distro. Now, it's important because we do believe still that Amazon EKS is the best way to deploy in your environment. This provides a way to deploy EKS Distro every place else that you need to. Now, you still get that option if you're deploying inside on top of EC2, but this is a good way that you have those options built in. Now, on the right-hand side of the slide, once you provision a cluster and it goes through the creation workflow, you'll see a listing of all the different clusters that you have in your environment. And one of those choices that are broken out there is all the details of the cluster. You'll see the source, the versioning. You can even go a little bit deeper into the actual what's been deployed out there and see all the different source images themselves and the fact that it's coming from EKS Distro. So if you have a couple components obviously being deployed that are not included with EKS Distro, you'll see those broken out separately. And this way you can see across all your clusters that alignment and what's actually deployed out there. We also actually work closely with KubeStack. And with KubeStack, you actually get the ability to now deploy your local development environment and have some consistency. Now, we've heard this commonly from customers. They want the ability to have the experience on-prem and in cloud exactly the same. And part of the goal of that is when they go through development workflows, as close as they can be to Amazon EKS, the more testing they can do locally, obviously can't be exactly the same, but as close as they can possibly be, you can actually, they want to be able to have that. And so with KubeStack, you can deploy a local development environment that's running EKS Distro plus the other tooling. And so what you're actually getting now from all these different partners is the ability to have a provisioning of a cluster, the tooling to actually have that deployed out there pretty easily, plus all the benefits that they have, and have the experience now of a consistency of an EKS distribution, the reliability and the security cognizance that we have and put into those distributions, and then the consistency every place using these tools. So this is a pretty important goal for some of our customers that were adopting Amazon EKS Distro. Now let's talk a little bit about running the EKS Distro itself. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're actually making this available on GitHub repo. So you can go to the GitHub repo and pull that down. And we've also provided some instructions on there too. So there's documentation in the GitHub repo, example use cases like the one that we have here for cops, instructions and details about how you can swap out where to put the right string so you can pull from our repo instead of upstream if you wish to do so, and how to get started as well. So this is one of the examples that we have that you can actually take a look at, and this is providing that documentation. And by the way, I also mentioned earlier that you can also pull this from and have as a source if you're deploying in AWS from S3, or you can pull also from ECR as well. Well, some of the bits from S3 and some of the bits from ECR as relevant, right? The container bits like Core DNS, CSI sidecars, you're going to be able to pull those from ECR, and then the S3 public bucket for all the other bits as well. And then, like I mentioned earlier too, it's reflected inside of the new ECR public repository too. But as far as actually deploying with cops, this set of instructions provides an easy way for you to be able to actually deploy that. We provide the instructions, so if you're doing a POC, you want to test it out, see what actually gets provided along the way, there's some of these instructions that are provided there. So you just go through the normal flow of actually following the cop script to actually provision and create the cluster. And then you're going to provide a couple of additional commands to make sure that it gets pulled down using all the different bits that you need to from EKS Distro and not using the default built-in ones. And so over the last 25 minutes or so, you've seen a lot about EKS Distro, gotten a little bit of the details. I invite you guys to go to the EKS Distro product page to check out a little bit more, the GitHub repo to find out more about it, as well as some details. New version will be available there. There's an SNS topic, so you'll get notification when you go to pull it down. And we invite you to send us some of the feedback along the way as far as what your experience has been so far, collaborate with you in terms of continue to build out this experience, provide some of the value that we provide to customers with Amazon EKS, but inside of your environment. And so thank you, and looking forward to any questions that you have.